Have you ever wondered if a single night could change the history of a museum forever? On March 18, 1990, Boston was still and quiet. It was the early hours of the morning, just after St. Patrick's Day celebrations, when two men dressed as police officers walked up to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. They claimed they were responding to a disturbance. The night guards, young and inexperienced, let them inside. What happened next would become the most infamous art heist in modern history. In just 81 minutes, the two men cut 13 works of art from their frames, loaded them into their car, and disappeared into the darkness. Paintings by masters like Rembrandt, Vermeer, and Monet gone. A collection now valued at over $1 billion, stolen in plain sight, never to be seen again. More than 34 years later, the case remains unsolved. The empty frames still hang on the museum's walls, waiting for their art to return. The FBI has chased hundreds of leads. Suspects have been named. Theories have circulated, from Boston's underworld to international smuggling rings. And yet, not a single piece has been recovered. The museum and the FBI continue to offer a $10 million reward for information leading to the return of the works. This is more than just a theft. It is a cultural wound. Each missing painting represents not just financial value, but history, creativity, and a piece of humanity lost. And so tonight we open a cold case file unlike any other, the Billion-Dollar Gardner Museum Heist. Over the next few chapters, we'll walk through the night of the robbery, the stolen treasures, the suspects who may have held the key, and the questions that still haunt investigators to this day. Before we begin, one note of caution. Some theories you'll hear, such as the possible role of Boston's mafia, remain speculation based on historical accounts and FBI suspicion. Where the record is uncertain, I'll tell you so. Our goal here is not sensationalism, but to carefully retrace the facts of this extraordinary crime. So let me ask you this. How does a theft so daring, so massive in scale, remain unsolved for more than 3 decades? And what does it mean for a city, and for the art world, when pieces of our shared heritage vanish without a trace? To understand the mystery, we first need to step back. Who was Isabella Stewart Gardner? What made her museum so unique? And what exactly was stolen on that night in 1990? Let's begin with the story of the museum itself, and the treasures that vanished. To understand why this heist left such a deep scar, we need to step back to the late 19th century, when Isabella Stewart Gardner began building her extraordinary collection. Isabella was a wealthy Boston socialite with a restless, adventurous spirit. She traveled across Europe and Asia, buying art, manuscripts, and rare objects with a boldness that shocked some of her contemporaries. She believed that art wasn't meant to be locked away in private estates, it should be shared. So in 1903, she opened her museum, designed to feel like a Venetian palace right in the middle of Boston. By 1990, the Gardner Museum had become a beloved cultural landmark. But it was also, in some ways, a relic. The museum honored Isabella's will, which stated that the galleries should remain exactly as she left them. That meant little could be altered, not even the placement of the paintings. And so, in an era when other institutions were upgrading their security, the Gardner remained vulnerable. Guards were few. Technology was outdated. The night of the robbery, the system was no match for two men with a plan. Now let's talk about the victims, not the guards who were tied up, but the art itself. 13 works disappeared that night. Each one was priceless, not only in money but in meaning. The most valuable was the concert by Johannes Vermeer. Only about 35 Vermeers exist in the world. This one depicted a man and 2 women gathered around a harpsichord. Quiet, intimate, filled with light. Experts today say it could be worth around $250 million. But really, how do you put a price on something so rare? Then there was Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. His only known seascape, painted in 1633. It shows a small boat struggling against furious waves, the disciples clinging on for their lives. In a cruel twist, the thieves cut the canvas right out of its frame, leaving behind a raw, empty outline where the masterpiece once hung. Another Rembrandt, a portrait called A Lady and Gentleman in Black, vanished too. So did a sketch by him. Edouard Manet's Chez Tortoni, a quiet cafe scene from 19th century Paris, was taken as well. Edgar Degas lost several of his small but delicate works, pastel sketches of dancers in motion. Even a Chinese bronze vessel from the Shang dynasty was stolen. Imagine walking into those galleries the next morning. Empty frames hanging like open wounds. A violinist by Degas gone. Vermeer's music lesson gone. It wasn't just theft. It was a silencing of voices across centuries. In total, the stolen art is now valued at around $1 billion. But perhaps the greater loss is cultural. These works were part of Boston's identity, part of humanity's shared history. And yet, on that March morning in 1990, they were carried out of the Gardner Museum and vanished without a trace. For the city of Boston, this was a shock. The early 1990s were a time of transition. Crime rates were high, but no one expected the heart of the city's art world to be struck like this. The Gardner robbery revealed just how fragile even the grandest cultural institutions could be. So picture this, 13 works, each telling a story, now silenced for decades. Imagine standing in front of those empty frames today. What do you feel, loss, anger, or hope that one day they'll come home? But how did it all unfold? How could two men, in less than 90 minutes, steal masterpieces worth a fortune and walk away untouched? To answer that, we need to follow the timeline of the crime itself, the night of March 18, 1990. So how did the crime actually unfold? Let's walk through the night step by step. It was the early hours of March 18, 1990, just after 1 a.m. Boston was quiet. St. Patrick's Day celebrations had wound down, and most of the city was asleep. Inside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, 2 young security guards were on duty. One of them was just 23 years old, working the overnight shift. It should have been a calm, uneventful night. At 1:24 a.m., 2 men in police uniforms pulled up outside in a hatchback. They buzzed the intercom and told the guard at the desk that they were responding to a disturbance. Whether it was instinct, fear, or simply inexperience, the guard opened the door and let them in. The supposed officers quickly revealed their true intentions. Within minutes, the guards were handcuffed and taken down to the basement. One of them was forced to lie face down. The other was bound to a pipe. Tape was pressed across their eyes and mouths. The thieves weren't in a hurry. They had time, and they knew it. For the next 81 minutes, the museum became their playground. Moving through the galleries, they went straight for certain works. They cut Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee from its frame. They took Vermeer's The Concert, Manet's Chez Tortoni, and several Degas sketches. They lifted a Chinese bronze vessel, small enough to carry under an arm. Oddly, they ignored entire galleries filled with treasures that were, by some measures, even more valuable. Why these pieces? That remains one of the central mysteries. Were they following a shopping list, working for someone specific? Or did they simply know what they wanted, guided by personal taste or limited knowledge? By 2:45 a.m., the thieves were finished. They wheeled some of the stolen works out using a cart, loaded everything into their small car, and drove off into the night. No alarms had been triggered, no one in the city noticed. Hours later, at 8 a.m., the day's shift arrived. The guards from the night before never came to unlock the doors. That was strange. When the staff finally managed to get inside, they found the guards still tied up in the basement. The police were called, and the horror of what had happened began to sink in. But here's where things get even stranger. The security cameras? Most of them weren't functioning. The few that did work captured almost nothing useful. The motion detectors recorded the thieves' movements, but without images, investigators were left with little more than a map of footsteps. And what about physical evidence? The duct tape used to bind the guards was collected. Fingerprints were lifted from certain surfaces. But remember, this was 1990. DNA testing was in its infancy, slow and imprecise. Nothing pointed directly to the culprits. One witness later reported seeing a small hatchback parked near the museum in the early morning hours. Could it have been the getaway car? Possibly, but again, no solid lead. The more investigators studied the crime, the more questions emerged. Why steal a relatively modest Chinese bronze vessel, but leave behind Michelangelo's sketches or priceless silver objects? Why take the time to unscrew a finial from a flagpole, something with little market value? These choices suggested either unusual motives or incomplete knowledge. And then there was the issue of time. 81 minutes. That's an eternity for a burglary. Most thieves would want to be in and out as fast as possible. Yet these men stayed nearly an hour and a half, calmly removing art, cutting canvases, and searching the galleries. It was as if they knew they would not be interrupted. So let me ask you, were these thieves experienced professionals or lucky opportunists who exploited a flawed security system? Did they have inside knowledge about the museum's weaknesses? Or did everything simply fall into place for them? By the end of that day, Boston knew it had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just a robbery, but a cultural disaster. The FBI was called in, and the investigation began. But as the days turned into weeks and weeks into years, the mystery only deepened. And that brings us to the next chapter, the investigation itself. Who were the suspects? What evidence was uncovered? And why, after decades, do those empty frames at the Gardner Museum still remain empty? They called it in to the museum as a routine disturbance. The men wore police uniforms. But what the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum opened its door to at 1:24 a.m. on March 18, 1990, was no routine visit. It was the beginning of an investigation that would stretch for decades and cross state lines. The FBI took the case immediately, treating it as one of the largest art crimes in the country and placing the stolen works into the National Stolen Art File. That federal involvement has never let up. The Boston Field Office continues to investigate in partnership with the museum and the U.S. Attorney's Office. In 2013, the Justice Department made a blunt public appeal. After years of work, the FBI said it believed the stolen paintings had been moved to Connecticut and the Philadelphia region, and that it had identified the thieves with a high degree of confidence. The statement opened a wider campaign, billboards, podcasts, and targeted appeals, meant to flush information out of the shadows. Yet even with that announcement, the Bureau admitted its knowledge of the art's later movements was limited, and the search continued. From day one, investigators faced an unusual mix of dead ends and tantalizing threads. Physical evidence at the scene was limited, and some items that might have yielded DNA, things like duct tape and handcuffs used on the guards, became the subject of controversy years later when reporting found those particular items could not be located for testing. That gap matters. Advances in forensic DNA analysis over the last 2 decades might have changed the case's course, but the trail wasn't as clean as investigators hoped. Over time, names repeatedly surfaced in reporting and interviews. Men with ties to local criminal crews, some with links to organized crime. Federal investigators publicly and privately focused on a Mid-Atlantic to New England criminal network allegedly connected to an auto shop in Dorchester run by Carmelo Merlino. Local reporters and long-form investigations traced how small-time thieves, mob associates, and fences intersected in the years after the robbery, and how offers to sell the art allegedly surfaced in places like Philadelphia and Connecticut. Those leads helped shape the FBI's theory, even when they didn't produce recovered paintings. One frequently named figure was Robert Gentile, a Connecticut man investigators and reporters long considered a person of interest. In 2012, the FBI executed a high-profile search of Gentile's property. Agents found a handwritten list of the stolen works tucked inside a 1990 newspaper, along with a mix of weapons and other contraband. Gentile later denied involvement. He cooperated at times, resisted at others, and ultimately died in 2021 still denying he had the paintings. The searches and interviews around Gentile illustrate how the investigation often moved from promising tip to frustrating dead end. Another recurring theme: people who might have had direct contact with the art died under suspicious or violent circumstances in the months and years after the theft. Several men connected to the Dorchester crew and to people in the investigation died between 1991 and the mid-1990s. Murders, overdoses, disappearances, and those losses chilled potential testimony and complicated the trail the FBI was following. Reporters and retired investigators have pointed to those deaths as part of why the case stalled. Witnesses who might have told what they knew simply weren't there anymore. At the same time, other high-profile theories circulated in the press and in public imagination. From the involvement of Whitey Bulger's network to suggestions of international sale or even destruction of the works. Scholars, journalists, and former agents have noted that Bulger's name often appears in speculation because of his place in Boston's criminal history. But publicly available evidence tying him directly to the Gardner theft is limited and, where offered, remains circumstantial. When we talk about these ideas, it's important to be explicit. They are theories sometimes grounded in pattern and association, sometimes born from the rumor mill. Not a single one has produced a confirmed recovery of the art. The market for stolen art, real or imagined, is its own obstacle. Paintings can be hard to monetize openly. The more famous a work, the harder to fence. That suggests two grim possibilities. Either the paintings were moved into closed criminal networks where they've been traded quietly, or they were damaged, destroyed, or otherwise lost. Some investigators and commentators have argued each possibility, often pointing to odd pieces of circumstantial evidence. A reported attempted sale, rumors of private collections, or even accounts from convicted criminals who claim to have seen or brokered the art. None of those threads has produced a recovered masterpiece. Through it all, the museum itself has held to a simple public offer. Information that leads to the safe return of the works will be rewarded. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum currently offers up to $10 million for information that results in the recovery of the stolen pieces in good condition. That reward stands as a formal invitation to anyone with knowledge. A reminder that investigators are prepared to work through channels of anonymity and negotiation to bring the art back. And yet, as we move into the third and fourth decades after the robbery, the investigation's pattern feels familiar. Bursts of public attention, bruising media cycles, targeted raids and interviews, and then long stretches of quiet as agents follow tips that often go cold. On anniversaries and in new documentaries, retired agents and museum investigators repeat the same central hope: that one day a homeowner cleaning out an attic, or a dying criminal's conscience, will supply the missing link. For now, the frames on the museum walls remain empty, the reward remains posted, and the FBI continues to ask the public for help. So I'll leave you with this. Given the trail of evidence, the 2013 DOJ statement about Connecticut and Philadelphia, the high-profile searches and interviews, the gaps in physical evidence, and the many plausible but unproven theories, what scenario makes the most sense to you? Do these paintings still exist, tucked inside a private stash? Were they offered and rejected by fences who couldn't move such famous works? Or, in the worst case, were some destroyed to erase trace? Share your thoughts, and remember, wherever you fall on this, the central fact remains: the art hasn't come home. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum still bears the scars of that night in March 1990. Empty frames hang where masterpieces once lived, silent reminders of a crime that remains unsolved more than 34 years later. 13 works of art, by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Manet, and others, valued at over $1 billion, are still missing. Their absence is not just about money. It's about culture, history, and a legacy that was stolen and has yet to be restored. This heist has done more than expose gaps in museum security. It's changed the way institutions think about protecting cultural treasures. It's reshaped law enforcement's approach to art crime. And perhaps most importantly, it's forced all of us to consider the fragile nature of history itself. One moment, a painting can be admired by thousands. The next, it's gone, perhaps forever. But there's still hope. Investigators haven't closed the file. The museum continues to offer a $10 million reward. And the public, through tips, theories, and sheer curiosity, keeps the case alive. So let me ask you, what do you think happened to the missing masterpieces? Were they tucked away in some hidden vault, traded in the criminal underworld, or maybe even destroyed? Do you believe the Boston Mafia truly held the key, or was it something, or someone entirely unexpected? Share your thoughts, your theories, in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you've enjoyed exploring this mystery with me, don't forget to follow and subscribe. There are many more cold cases and hidden histories waiting to be uncovered together. Even after all these years, the Gardner heist isn't just a story about stolen art. It's a reminder that some mysteries continue to live in the shadows, just waiting for a single clue or a single voice to bring them back into the light. Thank you for joining me for Cold Case Files, the Billion-Dollar Gardner Museum Heist. Until next time, keep your curiosity alive, and keep wondering what secrets might still be hiding in plain sight.